Okay, we're live. I hope. I think we. I see. Do according to my software, have some people in the chat. I want to welcome those of you who are joining us, and we would love to just get your feedback right off the bat. If there's any technical things we need to take care of as far as volume, let us know. And yeah, see someone commenting there. So good to see you in the chat. And also, I'm trying to stream this out to 4 different social media platforms. I think only 3 are working, it looks like. So we'll see. This was kind of a test to try to put more social media platforms out there.
Tim Fresh is so fancy.
Yeah, I'm trying. But to be honest with you, YouTube is where my main audience is. But as you all can see, I have with me as a guest tonight, once again, longtime friend of the channel, fellow YouTube content creator, Tim Wildsmith, now author of a wonderful book, Bible Translations for Everyone, a guide to finding a Bible that's right for you. That is going to be the primary topic for tonight, talking about your new book. Welcome, Tim.
Thanks so much, Tim. It's good to be here. Always fun to hang out with you on and off the channel. I love that our YouTube Bible Timness has turned into a real life friendship, and that we get to hang out every now and then. So, yeah, man, I'm honored to be here.
Oh, thank you so much. And that's sincere. I mean, we really do have a great friendship. It's the Tim Club. I was gonna ask you actually, other than writing the book, what was like a highlight of this year for you? And I was gonna ask, what was it when I visited?
Yeah, we posted that fun photo of you and me and Tim Nichols all hanging out together here in Nashville. That was definitely one of the highlights of my year. Such a great time to hang with you guys.
I want to go back to Nashville. I've got, quite a few friends there. So I would love to see you guys as well as other people I know in the Nashville area.
Yeah.
So as people are coming in, one of the questions I want to ask our audience, because again, the topic tonight is going to be Tim's new book, Bible Translations for Everyone. So I think a cool question to ask all of you out there is, if you had to pick one translation as kind of your favorite,
let's go.
I know it's hard to choose. Really, I always have to choose 2 myself. But Uh, tell us in the comments what your go-to translation would be. What would you say is your favorite Bible translation? I'm going to try to tally it as we go along here. I'm
Okay.
just kind of curious with the audience we have
I like
what
that.
they're going to say. So I'll just list some translations quickly here just to get people thinking about it. King James, New King James, NIV, NASB, ESV, CSB, NLT, NRSV. These are all translations that Tim Wildsmith talks about in his book, as well as other ones. Those are some main ones, though. All right, so I'm already seeing. Yes, you're allowed to put other translations too. Like I do see someone asking if they're obligated to say MEV. Yes, I see you. That's funny.
I
But
already had someone. I already had someone send me a message saying my content about the MEV in the book is out of date because apparently they've released an update to the MEV. Um,
that's
and
got to
that's
be frustrating.
I
Writing
mean
a book, how quickly things go out of date.
it's wild because I turned in my manuscript next week. It'll be 1 year, and so we had a couple months to make some changes, but this thing has been out of my hands for almost an entire year. And so yeah, like in a world of publishing where there's updates and things like that, like I've already said to my editor, this is one of those books that every few years I'm going to need to add a chapter or update some things,
Yeah.
and we're going to have to do a second edition, because the world changes, the Bible world changes a little bit.
Yes. That's that's definitely true. And as you're talking, I'm just trying my best to note what people are putting here.
I see
And
a lot of NKJV, some
yeah,
ESV.
yep, I see that. I see. I'm gonna imagine with people that watch my channel a lot, we're gonna get a lot of NKJV
Mm-hmm.
and NASB and LSB
Yep.
as well as MEV. That doesn't surprise me to see some of that. But I am seeing ESVs for sure.
Yep.
So cool. All right. Well, keep letting us know in the comments what your favorite translation. If I had to choose one, I'm going to go with the NKJV. Do you want to put yourself down for one, Tim Wildsmith?
Oh, I can't choose. It's like asking you which one of your children is your favorite.
Especially, you just authored this book, all these translations. Having you go on the record,
That's
choose
right.
one might be tough.
That's right.
That's funny. All right. Well, I haven't seen any complaints about the audio. Let us know in the chat if there are any issues. But I think it's everybody seems to hear us okay.
I
Yeah,
see
even
you. I see you, Wes, with your comment about the NKJV not needing to be updated. I know I've caused some kerfluffles on Tim's channel in the past with that conversation, so I'll just tiptoe politely around the
yeah,
NKJV folks tonight.
yeah. So, hey, great. That's a great topic. Um, Updating versions of the Bible,
Mm-hmm.
and in your book, you do talk about them. Um, Mark Ward
Yeah.
just mentioned that he said something like every Bible translation should have a planned update I think he said every 30 to 50 years.
Did he say that? I missed that.
I heard him say it somewhere,
Wow.
and it made me think of what happened in our conversation before with the three Tims,
Yeah.
where you said, maybe the NKJV is due for an update, and Nichols responded the way a lot of NKJV fans do. He didn't take too kindly to
He said he was going to hurt me, is what he said.
that.
I'm going to hurt him.
Yes, he in his southern way. I'm gonna hurt you. I'm gonna hurt you.
That's right. That's right.
So that NKJV though, how many years old is it?
NKJV early 80s. I think there was technically a slight tweak in 82. So we're going on 42 years now. Or maybe it was 84, but it's been at least 40 years since the NKJV has been touched. And there's been no significant major updates since then. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there was like that one little update, the tweak in 1984, right?
Yeah, I think that's what it was. It was 84. They did something to it, a slight tweak, but it wasn't like a major overhaul or anything because it had only been out for a few years. And you look at, I think my point is pretty clear there. Where you look at like the top 5 or 6 translations, and other than the KJV, you have all stuff that's come out since the NKJV came out,
Yeah.
and I, a lot of people, when I said that, they said, no, they like the stability of the text, and I totally get that. People wonder about translations like the ESV, although it's so popular. The ESV has been updated three major times. There's rumors going around right now. Some of the people on the ESV translation committee have said that they're talking about another update. And so I get why people are a little wary of that, but when I made that video, when we had that conversation about the NKJV, I used that clip in a follow-up video where I tried to explain myself a little bit.
That's
And
right.
several people came in the comments and were just giving me lists and lists of words from the NKJV that really aren't in common use anymore. So it's not as big of a deal as, say, the King James Version from 400 years ago. But there are words and phrases in the NKJV that are not as commonly used. So would those be the kind of things they would choose to tweak or to update? A lot of people have said, okay, let's go ahead and change the footnotes. Let's update the footnotes to represent new scholarship and word changes, but leave the text. I think that's an interesting idea, like an updated footnotes edition of the NKJV, but I have not heard any rumblings. And you and I know Philip, the guy who operates Thomas Nelson Bibles. I haven't heard any rumblings about an NKJV update at all. So I'm not expecting it anytime
Yeah,
soon.
he was on my channel
Yep.
several months ago, and he said nope, no plans to update the NKJV. But if Mark Ward's idea is valid, that concept, then the NKJV, at least another 10 years, would be due for an update. As much as I know that's painful for a lot of people to hear, but it's hard to discern how language changes because
It
it's
is.
so gradual, but it does change.
Yeah,
Yeah. So we do have a question, and by the way, I'd love to hear questions as we go along here. Feel free to
absolutely.
chime in. This is one right up your alley. What's the best premium Bible
Oh.
translation? I'm not sure how to answer that one, but
I have done a couple of videos on my channel where I talk about, I did it earlier this year with the NASB, where I had two huge stacks of Bibles right here in my studio of premium NASB Bibles. And I told everybody, I'm actually kind of shocked that there's this many different options for the NASB because it's not as popular of a translation as some of the others. Like NIV, there's actually much fewer NIV, the best-selling translation in the world. There's much fewer premium options in the NIV than there is in the NASB.
Mm,
I would say that if you are an ESV Bible fan, that most of the major premium Bible publishers, you've got multiple options from Schuyler, you've got multiple options from Allen, you've got multiple options from Cambridge, not to mention Crossway. So I think but the NASB kind of has all of that minus Crossway, but you add in Steadfast and Lockman and Humble Lamb. So there are a bunch of different options out there, but there's a couple translations that if you want a wide variety of options in the premium Bible world, that you have them more than the NLT, for example. When I first started reviewing Bibles, you couldn't find a premium NLT Bible. The Caxton went out of print, but now you've got a handful of options that are coming out. Humble Lamb is getting ready to do a new one, so those are even increasing as well.
yeah. And I would also say that the King James version, I actually years ago did a video about how the King James gets the royal treatment.
Yeah,
You
no
think of
pun
it, the
intended.
Allen, yeah, the Allen Bibles,
Mm-hmm.
some of the best
Well, and the
Bibles
thing
that they
about the
do.
thing about the KJV, sorry, the King James version, is that here in the United States, at least, not in England, but in the United States, it's in the public domain, so
That's right.
anybody can take. Like when Humble Lamb gets started, it's a great place for Daniel and Humble Lamb to start is with the King James version, like he did with the KJV Lion, because he doesn't have to pay licensing to a publisher. He can just go ahead and take the text of the KJV and publish it, and so it's an easier way for a company to get into premium Bibles by using the KJV. And not to mention, it's also still one of the best sellers. People love the KJV. It's a venerable edition of the text. So it's really a great option to have a lot of KJV Bibles out there.
Yeah. Well, I'm actually going to look this up, but I did have a topic that I kind of wanted to put out there right away.
Mm-hmm.
In your book,
Yeah.
I can't believe I didn't already have this ready to go, but I'll just at least verbally explain to people about your continuum, your Bible translation continuum.
Yeah.
And what is so interesting about your continuum is that on the word for word side, and just so
Mm-hmm.
everybody knows what we're talking about, you got the more word for word translations on one side, and then more thought for thought, and then kind of just a continuum of where they fall, where the different translations fall. And you interestingly had the New King James and the King James, I believe, a little more word for word than the NASB.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I even mentioned in my review of your book that I like that you had that, and I just thought that that was really interesting. So, what's the scoop on the continuum, and what made you decide to use that particular order of Bible translation?
Well, I see a comment here from M.A. Moreno who nailed it right on the head. I started doing some research about the translation spectrum. And if you just Google it, you find a bunch of different charts and graphs and things like that, and everybody's looked pretty similar. But I wanted to see if I could find some research. I did find some data that Lifeway published with the release of the CSB in 2017. I'm actually going to use some of that hard data in an upcoming video on my channel. I'm doing these Translation Tuesdays right now on my channel, so I'm going to use some of that. But also, my friend R. Grant Jones here on YouTube has a lot of really great. When a new translation comes out or he's reviewing a Bible, he actually has what I would call a scientific method of measuring verses as they relate in literalness to the original languages, and he ranks them on a scale. And so that was one of I used that as a footnote in the book because I point to Grant's channel and say, check this out. And one of the things I noticed was that Grant, when he measured things, he had the NKJV and the KJV to the left, as in more literal on the spectrum than translations like the NASB and the ESV. And honestly, Tim, I chose to do that in part because I did want my chart to be a little bit different than some of the ones you quickly Google. I wanted it to kind of stand out a little bit, but I also felt like the most scientific things I could find about translations, because that spectrum is not it's pretty subjective depending on who puts it out. When you see these translation spectrums, a lot of people just copy and paste stuff from the internet and create something pretty and put it out there. So I wanted to do that a little bit, and I do think one of the points I make in the book, in that opening chapter about the translations, how we get from ancient Hebrew and Aramaic and Greek and English, and I talk about the translation spectrum. I say I'm not really concerned with whether or not the NASB is more or less literal than the NKJV on a verse-by-verse basis, as I am with, I want people to understand that they are both word-for-word translations of the Bible. Depending on, Grant does not check every single verse in the Bible. If we did, if somebody wants to do that, I would gladly, maybe even donate some money to their process, but to get a truly exact scientific spectrum. But what I think is important is that everybody knows, the NASB was designed to be a word-for-word translation. The NKJV was designed there. They're in the same general bucket. And then when they get further apart is when you can kind of start to see the flavor and the feel of the difference of a translation.
I'm just glad that you like you said, you did it to stand out a little bit. I think that's good because I think people take those things as gospel truth, and
Yeah.
you make the point that there is some. You could call it subjectivity. I would say too, it's just a matter of whenever you're doing any kind of analysis,
Mm-hmm.
it's really about how you're going about doing that analysis that will affect outcomes. So with the New King James, so I'll give you an example. With the New King James, I believe in the Old Testament, you still have the phrase children of Israel most of the time. The
Mm-hmm.
NASB says sons of Israel. Well, if you count up all the times that the NASB says sons of Israel, you could make the case that makes it more literal.
Yep.
My experience, though, with the NKJV is there's a lot of times where it is actually more literal in the text than the NASB. But the NASB has a footnote saying literally it says
Yes.
this. So I could see it going either way.
Yeah.
It's a tough judgment call.
And depending, if you wanted to cherry pick verses here and there, like you could find verses where the NASB or the NKJV reads almost identically to the NLT, right? Because the NLT translator said, we're going to go with a word-for-word translation unless it doesn't read clearly in English. So there are places in the NLT, I say this in the book, which read just as literally as a whole, it's far more a dynamic translation. But again, you could cherry pick a few verses and make somebody believe that the NLT was a word for word translation, because it does that. So that's the kind of thing that I think I started down the rabbit hole of like, okay, in my book I have the sample verses, and the sample verses are the same verses in every chapter, so you can flip back and forth and see the different. You can read the different verses in the translations, and I tried to pick verses from a wide space around the Bible. I've tried to pick a few verses that are kind of occasionally ones that people bicker about. But I also, when I was doing that, I started to go down the rabbit hole of let's measure these with the original languages. And honestly, the book's called Bible Translations for Everyone, and it started to get so dense that I was like, I don't think normal people are going to want to read this. So maybe that'll be in a future iteration of something I do. But
Bible translations for nerdy people.
that would be a great sequel. Bible translations for actual Bible nerds.
There you go. And we can make more Bible nerds out of people by.
That's right.
Yes,
that's right.
Great. I love it. So we did get a question, and by the way, I want to just, if you're new to the conversation, we're asking people their favorite Bible translation. If you want to put that in the chat, you can just put the translation. You don't have to say much. And so far, I think the NKJV is a little in the lead, and the ESV was probably second place so far to my counting. So keep putting your favorite translation. This question, though, for you is, what Bible do you use in your devotional reading?
For me, that has been, I've got a couple of great NIV Bibles that I've been using a lot recently. A lot of people saw on my channel that my wife and my church, when I got ordained earlier this year, they gave me a really beautiful NIV wide margin. It's a Cambridge Bible. It was actually like a really affordable Cambridge wide margin called the NIV Insight, this really beautiful hardcover edition that came out a couple years ago with fantastic paper. And so that's been one that I've been trying to spend a little bit more time with, because I'm planning on making that like my tear it up Bible, writing in it and underlining it and stuff like that. And my pastor does teach from the NIV, and at Belmont, where I work, Belmont University, we use the NIV in chapel most often. And so that's just a translation. I grew up with it, and I've kind of been getting a little bit newly familiar with it. And then I do have a copy of the single volume, I don't even know what it's called. It's called the CSB Reader's Bible. It's the CSB edition that doesn't have verses and stuff like that. And so when I want to sit down and immerse myself in the Bible and go like read for half an hour, 45 minutes at a time, I usually grab that one because I like the reading experience without the verses. I pick up where I left off and kind of read through almost like a book. Mm-hmm. What about you, Tim?
Well, I try to read various translations. So for my read-throughs, I would say, like right now, this year, I've been kind of plugging away through the New Living Translation just because I've never read that before.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that is my normal first choice, but
sure,
I wanted to read it, and it's certainly helpful for devotional. I'm also going through. I really love the 30 days devotionals that Holman just came out with. 30 days in the Psalms, 30 days with Jesus.
That's cool.
30 days in the epistles.
Oh, is that those Trevin Wax
30
books?
days with Paul. Yes, they're just amazing. They're fantastic. So that's the CSB, but again, that just happens to be the publisher for those books is Holman. So
got it.
Okay, yeah. So looks like NKJV still doing strong, but again, that's the bias of my audience. Obviously, I have drawn KJV people to this channel, so we're seeing that. But I do see NASB, CSB as well. So, all right. And then, well, you got to pick one. See people list. I understand it is hard to pick just one, but yeah, I know. People, they have a few favorites, and actually, in your book, you do talk about actually at the toward the end of the book that instead of trying to find that one translation, you give the concept of a translation team. So is there a team you would say is yours, Tim?
Yeah, I think that part of the process of writing the book for me was spending time in these different translations and discovering that, how do I want to phrase that? I have found that comparing verses in different translations is really helps me think and study the text.
Hmm.
If anybody ever hears me preach a sermon, I rarely preach a sermon where I don't, as I'm working my way through the passage, I don't go, and actually, if you jump over to this translation, it says this here, because the slight difference in wording. I'm getting ready. This weekend, I'm going to be preaching at a church in Wisconsin, actually, and I'm preaching through the prodigal son parable, and I'm preaching in the NIV because the pastor there preaches in the NIV, and it says that he was wild living is how they describe the younger son's behavior, and then in the ESV it says reckless. And I love that word reckless because wild and reckless kind of mean the same thing, but
Yeah.
reckless really just it's more than just wild. It's like irresponsibly wild, and so I really like that. And so I have a little note in my sermon notes to say, hey, point out that the ESV says a different word here, that sort of thing. So that's a long way of answering your question, but I just really like the whole compare and contrast method. And so yeah, I think it's okay to have one translation, and that's what I hope people find through the book is like, oh, this translation really works for me because of, the features in the text or the textual basis or where it is on the translation spectrum, all of that together. Yeah, pick the one you really love that's going to be your daily reader, your everyday Bible, but then go somewhere else on the spectrum or go to a translation that has some different features in it and balance
Hmm.
it out a little bit so that you can learn something as you go by comparing and contrasting. So yeah, for me it's like, okay, so let's go to, if I'm going to read the NIV every day, then let's go to somewhere on the other side of the spectrum. For me, I have been checking out your beloved NKJV in part because it's a formal equivalence translation, in part because it's the New Testament is based on the Textus Receptus and not the critical text, so I get to mix that in there a little bit. Like I said, CSB has been one, so I'm kind of going from one side of the spectrum to the other and then something kind of somewhere in between. But honestly, Tim, I'm that guy who pulls up Bible Gateway and clicks the little button where you can compare translations, and I just go back and forth and surf through different ones. And that's kind of
Yes.
how I do like a deep dive. I talked about this on my channel recently. Like without a study Bible, without a commentary, without a Bible dictionary, just looking at different translations really helps me think about the text and kind of work through it a little bit.
I'm with you there. I with computers now, it just means I can access a lot of different Bible translations.
Yeah.
But when pressed, I try to narrow it down to what I think is representative of of some very key elements. And
Yeah.
it's just what you said. New King James allows you to see, the Textus Receptus a little bit more. It's got great footnotes in there. I think the Christian Standard Bible is a great contrast,
Yep.
and also has good footnotes. So those
Yep.
are two. But then the ESV and NASB, NASB is really good. And you mentioned that in your book too. The NASB is particularly good for deep study. Um,
Yeah, as I'm going around talking about my book, one of the things I like to point out is little features, right? So the translators make decisions when they're going through these texts, and so one of the ones that a lot of people I think in our world of Bible lovers know is that the NASB in the New Testament, whenever it's quoting the Old Testament, they put it in small caps. It's not like the author is suddenly yelling at us. It's not capital letters. It's small caps. But that is a way for the NASB to subtly let the reader know, hey, they're quoting the Old Testament here. I use an example from, I think it's Mark's Gospel. I can't remember what chapter, it might be Mark chapter 4, but Jesus doesn't say, as it is written in the prophet Isaiah. He just quotes Isaiah. And if you don't know that he's quoting Isaiah, you don't know that he's quoting Isaiah. And so it's helpful that the NASB, or I like the NASB better than the CSB for this reason, because the NASB does small caps where the CSB does bolded text. I find the small caps to be a little less disruptive. The NKJV for a long time, I know there's some editions that don't, but they use oblique text, which is kind of like italics, but not exactly like italics. So there's some text, but like the NIV, the ESV, they don't do that. And so if you really want to, just think about that. I'm reading the text, I see this quote in small caps, and now I go, wait, Jesus is quoting Isaiah. I'm going to go read Isaiah, figure out what Isaiah is talking about, and that'll help me understand what Jesus is talking about. You're using the text to study the text. But you might need a feature like what you see in the NASB in order to know that. And so if you have a different translation that doesn't do that, you've got to be more aware as you're going through it. You've got to look at the footnotes, etc.
Yeah. So, in your book, one of the things too that I thought would be good mentioning is right off the bat, you had an experience with um, using a Bible. It was an NIV, and then someone came along. This was a while ago, but it was when the ESV first came out, and they told you that the ESV was like this amazing translation, something
Yeah.
like that. So, what's your perspective on that experience, or maybe just share a little bit about what that did for you when that happened?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up, Midwest, kind of middle of the road, conservative evangelical upbringing, and so the NIV. I grew up in the '80s and the '90s. The NIV was like the translation that a lot of people read from. I think I probably knew about the New King James Version, but really in my mind it was either NIV or King James. And so
Mm.
I always had NIV Bibles. I had the NIV Study Bible. I had the NIV Thin Line Bible that I talk about in the book. But I was a freshman in college when the ESV came out. And I jokingly say this, but I literally remember thinking this. It's called the English Standard Version. So my stupid 19-year-old self thought, oh, I guess we're all supposed to switch to this if we speak English because it's the new standard version that we're all supposed to read. I had no idea that it was a new translation from a new publisher and all that stuff. And so,
Mm.
but the ESV quickly gained popularity. By the time I graduated from college, a lot of people I knew were reading the ESV. And so I bought a little thin, or I asked probably for Christmas or my birthday, I asked for a little thin line ESV. I still have a copy of that Bible. And then a few years later, everybody had to get the ESV study Bible because it was the new big thing. And that's another thing that I learned while writing this book was I think a lot of people have stories like that. When you ask them, why do you read the Bible translation you read? A lot of people go, I don't know. I mean, somebody gave me a copy of it, and they haven't actually done the research, and they haven't, think about this, Tim. Like, you and I are sitting here, we got iPhones sitting next to us, and we're talking on computers, and like, I know I did a lot of research. I'm looking into my camera right now. I know I did a lot of research before I spent money on this camera because I wanted to make sure that I had the right thing for my YouTube channel and all this stuff. Why wouldn't I spend a little time and energy doing some research on the Bible that I'm going to be reading every single day? And so that's one of the things that I've kind of like my story of, oh, NIV, ESV, I don't know. And now that I know more about it, I'm able to make an informed decision, and I can answer that why a little bit more clearly, a lot more clearly, and I want to help other people be able to do that as well.
That's great. Yeah, there really is a difference between kind of just that base knowledge that a lot of people, and really it's hardly base knowledge. It's just more just knowledge that you acquire from very scattered information. And I think a lot of people are in the same boat as you talk about at the beginning of the book. But yeah, you're now in a very different place. You really understand a lot more about what really goes into translations. I want to remind the audience too. We want to hear your questions. Love to hear any questions that you have. This is your chance to ask the author. We're discussing his fantastic new book, Bible Translations for Everyone. And so if you have any questions about translations, anything related to what we're talking about, would love to hear your questions or just hear your thoughts. It's great seeing those in the chat.
Yeah.
And also, again, if you're maybe just popping in now, we're asking people what their favorite Bible translation is. So if you just want to put one translation, we're trying to get one because I'm going to tally up and see according to my audience, what the most uh, number one chosen translation is in the audience. So
Let's go.
all right. Anyway, so kind of back on that subject of the English Standard Version, it really it really did make waves when it came on the scene. And the NIV, what used to be really popular, and you do talk about this in your book. You actually cover the ESV and how it kind of came on the scene at the time that the NIV was dealing with some gender
Mm-hmm.
language issues. And actually, you're incredibly diplomatic in how you cover these types of topics, because I think from researching. I mean, it was a pretty it was a huge deal,
Yeah,
in the '90s. I mean, it was kind of a debacle, if we want to put it that way. Just
sure.
everything going on with that. But you also remember earlier we were saying about how your book might have to be updated. And the question is, will the NIV ever not be number one on the bestseller list? I'm going to show a chart. This is I want the audience to understand, though. This is just October of this year. Other months have had a different order of listing. So this is just one month. It could be an outlier, but a lot of people, I think, are responding to this.
There you go.
So there it is for the month of October, according to these sales. Now, do you have any comments about how these kinds of lists are made? Because these aren't all the sales of every Bible in the world.
They're not. You can dig into this is the Evangelical Christian Publishers Association. They track Christian book sales, Bible sales, and they do a really good job. They do not get every last bookstore. For example, a lot of people we know in the premium Bible world buy Bibles from evangelicalbible.com, and I'm pretty sure that EVB is not reporting to the ECPA. So there's Bible sales right there, but they are getting some of the highest volume Bible sellers in the world, places like Amazon, Walmart, Target, and then they have a whole network of independent booksellers. You can see all that data on their website. So I think it's a pretty decent snapshot. Obviously, it doesn't cover everything, but the annual list is usually NIV number 1, KJV number 2, and then ESV, NLT are somewhere in the 3 and 4 position. And there's one month, I think last year there was a month where the NLT really popped. And I don't know, like, if this is indicative of, Crossway released a new Bible in October that really did well, or, if things like that. But, yeah, I have seen consistency. I've looked at these charts going back the last decade or so. And the NIV is usually annually going to be number 1. But it's interesting to see what happens in the middle tiers kind of moving around. Like this right here has CSB number 6. I've seen it as high as number 4. It has the Reina Valera, which is kind of the Spanish equivalent to the King James Version, at number 7. It's pretty popular there. This is the first time I've seen the NRSV in the top 10 in a while. So there's definitely the NIRV, if people don't know, it's called the Reader's Version of the NIV, which is just a simplified version of the NIV, which is easier to read at a lower reading level for everyday folks, but also used in a lot of kids' Bibles. So you can imagine there's a lot of kids' Bibles that are sold out there. So it's also not necessarily indicative of readership. It's indicative of ongoing sales on a month-to-month basis. So,
That's what people need to know.
Yeah.
Because in their minds, they might be just thinking, okay, this is the number 1 Bible that's being used. Not necessarily. It's just the Bible for that month that was sold a lot. And it could be a specific edition, like even with the ESV, maybe if they happen to put out a children's Bible and a lot of people buy that children's Bible that particular month, it is going to affect the sales. It doesn't
Absolutely.
necessarily mean. But that being said, when you start to look at the overall picture over a lot of months, it does say something about readership. And I think one of the things about the ESV that I find interesting is it's been consistently way up there, and kind of I feel like it's continually gained traction.
I
Do
agree.
you feel that way too?
Yeah, and I've said this on my channel a lot, that I just think Crossway does such a great job at publishing unique, interesting, beautiful Bibles. Like you go to Crossway's website, you can find pretty much anything you're looking for. You can get study Bibles, journaling Bibles, devotional Bibles, and they make lots of different cover options and things like that. So I just think they've hit a home run as a Bible publisher. And a lot of people have asked, I've seen some comments here about the Berean Standard Bible and the MEV and things like that. And I just look at, I go, hey, I went to the MEV's website. Apparently, they released an update to the MEV this month, and I couldn't find it on their website. Like, I couldn't find any
Mm.
basic information about it. And so you've got to be savvy as a Bible publisher if you want your Bible translation to gain traction, because people have to know about it in today's modern era. And a company like Crossway, I think, has just done an absolute home run of, yeah, I hate to call it this, but it's marketing. They've marketed and they've created great products for people to have that they can. And then, yeah, they have become, I think, the leading word for word translation in evangelical Christianity in America. And so there's a lot of people who lean to that, in part because I think the NASB and the NKJV feel like older versions. The ESV is like the newest, quote unquote, best word for word formal equivalence translation out there.
Mm-hmm. Which appeals to many people. Yeah.
Absolutely. I go to churches all the time, and at this point, I'm kind of surprised when I walk into, an evangelical church if the ESV is not what their pastor is preaching from, because it just feels like that's kind of the new norm in the evangelical world for sure.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Seems to be what I have observed. But then, at least in the circles that I'm around, the other one I might see would be the New American Standard.
Sure. I've
Um,
seen CSB more. I mean, I go to a Baptist church, and I'm in the heartland of Baptist world, and so I feel like I've seen that a lot too. But that might just be because Lifeway does a good job with their own kind of network of getting the CSB out there. But I really like it as a translation. But I think they do a good job with Baptist for sure.
yes, and I think the CSB is fantastic. Now, I do want to have us talk a little
Mm.
of this wonderful question. Comment, please, on your thoughts on copywriting the Bible. Here we've been talking about marketing and
Yeah.
how that plays into Bible sales. And so, what do you think about copywriting the Bible?
I've heard a couple of different arguments for and against it.
Mm.
We talked earlier in this conversation about the KJV being a public domain translation. So you know what? You can put a lot of Bibles out there because you can grab a hold of the text and publish it. And that's one of the reasons why I think a good reason for copywriting is because publishers can, for lack of a better term, protect the translation from just anybody being able to do whatever they want with it. When you have a copyright in place, there are limitations on other people being able to just print a conversion of your Bible or to put it out there. You may have had a similar email today, Tim. We get, as Bible reviewers on YouTube, we get emails from people all the time. I got an email from someone who wanted me to review something, and I thought, I don't think that they're allowed to do that because they were taking a very popular translation and putting it out there and they were selling it, and it did not look to me like they had gone through the process. And I'm not going to be a rat and go tattletale on them, but I was like, I'm probably going to stay away from that one. So I think that there's that reason, in a wide world where anybody can do anything and stuff can travel around the world via the internet in a split second, that there's actually some wisdom in copyrights and things like that. But I also think that we have to, I didn't talk about this a lot in the book, but I think we just have to be aware that there is a money-making thing that gets involved with all of this. The Bible is a big industry in the world right now for making money. And I saw someone in the comments, I don't remember who it was, mentioned I talk about this in the book, that really the release of the revised version of 1885 kind of foreshadowed the boom of Bibles, because that Bible sold so well, so quickly, because it was this new update to the KJV. And they did something really savvy. From the time the KJV was released to the revised version, there's this new little country that started called the United States of America. And the
I think
revised
I've heard of
version
them.
committee, they decided to include some American scholars, and they were allowed to produce updates. But they said to the Americans, hey, we're releasing this, and you have to wait 15 years before you can release your own version of this. That's why the American Standard Version did not come out until 1901, because they had to wait until they could let Thomas Nelson publish it. So that kind of foreshadows this little game that they're playing with. Hey, we put a lot of, this is another reason that's good for translations or for copyrights. these people who put these translations together spend a lot of time and a lot of money developing these translations. And those copyrights allow them to be able to recoup their expenses by owning the rights to the Bible so that they can go out there. Like Biblica, for example, the NIV, they don't publish a lot of Bibles. They license that out to Zondervan and other translations. And that's one of the ways that they're able to continue to pay for shepherding and overseeing and updating these translations long term. That's the kind of way I think about it, Tim. What about you?
Yeah, I think I don't have a problem with it, honestly. I think one thing that comes to mind is it's a little bit of this just catch 22, or you just have to accept the reality of how it works, if you want to put it that way.
Yeah.
So, because if you look at the ESV, that has a copyright, and look at how it has gained such a good foothold. And I think what you said there about how it actually helps compensate for the work that's been done so that you can afford to keep promoting that translation. You take a translation like the Berean Standard, and I know some of you out there love it so much. Well, they're kind of demonstrating, yes, you can make a translation widely available, and they've actually put it, I believe, in the public domain.
Yep.
Which is awesome, but how are they going to make money and make more Bibles? I think they're struggling to do that.
Yeah.
And so making money, I can see why people have a hard time, but you see the dynamic in the Bible. It's like, should ministers make money? And the answer is yes, actually. They should. The worker is worthy of his wages.
Yep.
But you should use your money in the way that is honoring to God. You shouldn't be laying up treasures on on earth just in selfish ways. So I think same with Bible publishers. They need to make sure they steward those resources and use them in good ways. And I would say that's one reason Crossway I think they're being blessed, because they've been very generous in how they've used their resources.
Absolutely. It's a great point.
Okay, so I might while I was talking, I might have missed some questions.
I see one quick one in here from Jose. I'll answer that. Jose,
yes.
I don't talk about N.T. Wright's translation per se of the New Testament. I did review it when they updated it earlier this year, maybe it was last year. But I do quote Tom in a chapter and some of the ideas that he has about functional dynamic equivalence versus a formal equivalence, and which one is better. I asked that question after I explained the differences between formal equivalence and functional equivalence. I say, so which one's better? And kind of have that conversation in that chapter. And I use a quote from Tom Wright in there where he kind of talks about the flavor and the feel, and there's different types of accuracy, which I think really helps to kind of illuminate why I think it's good that we have translations in both categories of formal and functional.
Okay. Yeah, I remember you quoting N.T. Wright. He made a good point there about how language works. It's something I've thought of too.
I'm pretty sure they sent him a copy of my book. He does some stuff with Zondervan, and I'm pretty sure they sent him a copy of my book. So I'm just like hoping one day he just kind of throws it into something and he mentions it. That would be cool if he actually reads it, but I don't know if he will.
Well, he did his own translation of the New Testament, right? And
yeah. They just renamed it New Testament for Everyone, and mine's called The Bible Translations for Everyone. So maybe some people will mistake my book for one of his books and accidentally buy it.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that somehow they're a related, product or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, so something that I wanted to bring up from your book, and by the way, again, if you're joining us, we want to hear any questions you have as we talk to the author here of his new book, Bible Translations for Everyone. We're having a great conversation and love to answer questions you might have. But one of the things I love about the book is you did research. And so even as someone like myself who's learned quite a bit, I'm still hearing new things that I had never heard before. I knew nothing about the NLT having any kind of a Catholic edition out there.
Yeah.
do you have any information about that? Because that really shocked me.
Yeah, there's a couple of different dioceses in the Catholic Church who've really championed Catholic editions of the Bible, and they have to kind of go through the process of, there's an ESV there's an NLT there's an RSV well, there's an RSV 2 CE now. They have to go. They have to go to the publisher of that Bible and say, "Hey, we'd like to do an edition of the Bible that includes the apocryphal books in it," and then sometimes they want to make a slight tweak to the translation here or there in a handful of places based on Catholic doctrine, but I don't think that's very prominent. And then they've got to go through that process of developing it. Before then they get it approved. Each translation has to have an imprimatur, a seal of approval from a bishop in the Catholic Church. And so they have to go through a lengthy process to get that out there. But yeah, now there are several translations that I would consider Protestant translations of the Bible that have Catholic counterparts, which is really interesting. It's funny you mentioned that. Somebody sent me an email today and said, "I just finished your book. I had no idea there was an ESV CE." And I was like, "Oh yeah." And they were saying, "Why doesn't Crossway sell it?" I was like, "Well, I'm not sure if that was part of the deal, about it, but Crossway is a pretty distinctly Protestant publisher, so I don't expect them to start offering a Catholic edition of the Bible on their website, but it's definitely out there from other publishers."
Yeah, I would say theologically it doesn't fit into Crossway's goals, but it's interesting though they made their translation available to be used in a Catholic setting, which is to me it's I understand there's a lot in there that people are going to have strong opinions about, but anything that could help make a translation actually become more universal, to me is really positive. In a day we're living in where everything is so disintegrated and everybody's in their silos, I love the idea that maybe there is a translation that will be as broadly accepted and used as the King James. I know it's not going to be the same as the King James. Sorry, I'm offending people. I know I am. But we're just living in a different era, But
that's right.
That being said, I do think that it's cool if you have a translation. Here's what I think is happening with the ESV. It's not necessarily the one that everyone says is their first choice. But what I'm amazed at is you could go into so many different kinds of churches and use the ESV, and they would be like, "Hey, that's good. That's cool."
Right. That's a good point, Tim.
I think that's really, there's a lot of credit for them for that.
Real quick, I see a question from the Wheeling Dragon that says, "Have you ever seen that Great Adventure? Have you seen that the Great Adventure Bible is finally coming out in a premium edition?" And to that, I say, Wheeling Dragon, yes, I have seen that it's coming out in a premium edition, and I have a video coming out tomorrow where I'm going to be reviewing it, so you can check it out. They reached out to me. What's funny is they reached out to me and they said, "Hey, we're doing this," and then they sent it to me like weeks ago, and they're like, "You can't say anything about it." And I was like, this Bible is fantastic. It looks really great. My Catholic friends, my Catholic family are gonna love this, but I've had to keep my mouth shut until they just announced it yesterday. So yeah.
Didn't another reviewer talk about that Bible?
I think Tim Nichols did, but I don't really like his channels.
There's
he's here.
Well. Actually, where is that guy? That's
Where is that guy?
Where is he?
The third Tim.
I literally was just thinking about you, Nichols, and boom, you popped up there. Good to see you.
If you want a closer look at this Bible, you can see it on Nichols' channel right now. He's got it.
So I just want to clarify though, with the NLT Catholic, I'm still my mind is still blown by that. It has the Apocrypha, and who made it then, if it does have the Apocrypha? Because
they go through. I don't know for sure. I think that the Catholic folks develop that translation based on the NLT spectrum, or maybe it's members of the translation committee from the NLT worked on it. I don't even know if I put that information in the book.
The reason I ask is because the ESV already had. It's just a revision of the Revised Standard.
They already had the Revised Standard. Yeah,
the Revised Standard had the Apocrypha. So to make a ESV with Apocrypha is somewhat easy to do and keep continuity there.
Yeah.
The NLT has a very kind of unique history to it, coming
Yeah.
from Kenneth Taylor. Is that his name in
Yeah,
the
Ken
Living
Taylor.
Bible?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, how do you make a NLT apocrypha? I've never heard of that. So that's something I'm really
My
curious about.
guess is because the NLT, started as, going back to the Hebrew and Greek, that they went back to those manuscripts of the Apocrypha, the ancient manuscripts that they were using to translate for like versions of the RSV and stuff like that. My guess is they went back to those originals and did it with the translation philosophy of the NLT in mind. It's funny you ask these questions, Tim. I've never read the NLT CE's books of the Apocrypha.
We got to ask Tyndale
But
to get
seriously,
us.
that might be a really interesting way to read the Apocrypha, because it'll be unlike. There's no such thing as an NIV with Apocrypha. I bet you it's going to be a really interesting way to read those books, which I've only ever read in like I've only ever read in like a formal equivalent style.
Yeah. Can we? Are we going to get like a message apocrypha at some point?
Poor Eugene is gone. I don't think that's going to happen.
Well,
I'm now looking at my own book to see if I wrote anything in here about this. It's been that long since I wrote it.
yeah. Okay, yeah. So people are saying that Tyndale produced it, and I, I, I'm just curious what the details of that were, because, like I said, the NLT is specifically a modified version, if you will, of the Living Bible.
They did have a Living Bible Catholic edition as well back in the 70s.
So, and even the Living Bible, if I remember correctly, I thought he was using the American Standard Version a lot when he did the Living Bible. Is that
I
true?
think I think I think Ken Taylor's original Living Bible was a paraphrase of the ASV that
Yeah.
he was paraphrasing, and then he kind of went that way. He started paraphrase, and then he referenced Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. Whereas with the NLT, they hit the reset button and started from the original languages.
Yeah, so I know I'm really fixated on this, and I apologize to my audience, but you know, I don't think there is any kind of ASV apocrypha. So it's just a totally different approach
Yeah,
to getting the apocrypha into the NLT than the original books of the NLT.
yeah.
So anyway, just I found that really really interesting. If I understand you, Nichols, and I'm just going to put his comment up here. You reviewed it. Are you saying that you reviewed the NLT Catholic edition? I didn't know that. I'll check out that review. And for those,
That's probably the best way to find out, Tim, is
yeah,
in the preface to the NLT Catholic edition. They will probably have some information about how they went about translating it.
yep. Okay. And then I'm seeing it's neat to hear from the audience. The ASV was published with the revised version Apocrypha by Thomas Nelson. Hey, good information there,
There you go.
Marcus. I love that. Okay, yes. And then Nichols confirmed that is the NLT Catholic edition. I didn't know that that was out there. That is so interesting. Huh. Well, that's one of the great things about this book is, you're gonna hear things, read things that you haven't ever heard before. So um, one of the topics too that I do want to make sure we address before we wrap up here, because I love controversy. When you talk about the NRSV,
Yeah,
you do a good job of bringing up the issue of gender inclusiveness,
yes.
and so we're going there now. The
Let's do it.
audience. This is our chance. If you want to ask anything about gender language, uh, so when it comes to gender inclusiveness, one of the comments that I have made before on my channel, and maybe you've kind of noticed this, is that if you're doing gender changes with a literal translation,
Mm-hmm.
it's actually more noticeable than if you're doing any kind of modification of gender language with something that's more thought for thought. Because in a thought for thought translation, you're already able to kind of change the wording enough to
Yeah,
where gender language is just not as noticeable. Does that
yeah,
make sense?
yeah. I agree with that.
Yeah.
It it's definitely one of the things I talk about in the book is that it makes more sense to me for a thought for thought translation to choose to go the route of gender inclusive, because their approach to Bible translation from the beginning is clarity in English is valued at a high priority, and that's kind of the heartbeat behind gender inclusive translations, is clarity for the modern day English reader about what the ancient text was trying to say. You know?
Right, right. It's interesting though how it shifts over time, because the NLT, and it may still do this, but the NLT, which was produced in the 90s, had a footnote that would sometimes indicate, if I remember correctly, if they had changed gender at all. Like with brothers and sisters, I think they put in the
Yeah.
footnotes. And so the NRSV did the same thing originally,
Mm-hmm.
but I've noticed the new NRSV doesn't even give a footnote. I'm pretty sure that the
Yeah,
updated edition.
I believe that's true. They in far fewer places, they are offering that footnote, and they're just kind of baking it into the translation without the notes, which I'm a little disappointed in that in the NRSV UE. There's a couple things I'm disappointed in with that as a translation, but yeah, I waited to the NRSV chapter, even though we now have editions of translations that came before the NRSV, the NASB and the NIV in particular. Have adopted varying levels of gender inclusive language in their translations. I waited to the NRSV chapter because that's really the first translation to really embrace that concept fully. And then it's from there. You hinted at some of the issues with the NIV in the 90s that led to the ESV. One of the fun things about my book is that it's in chronological order. And so you get to see the unfolding history of the Bible in English, and how, okay, this decision by the NRSV made this decision by the NIV and the NLT. And then it fires up everybody to kind of keep moving forward. So you can kind of see it. But I also wanted to explain what it is. I see a lot of comments on my channel when we talk about gender inclusive translations. I see this on Facebook and things like that. People get that conflated with dialogues in our culture right now about gender identity. And that's not what it is. Like, people are the theys and the thems and the pronouns and stuff like that. That's not what we're talking about when we're talking about gender inclusive language in the Bible. We're talking about how we translate ancient Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek words into English. And the inclusive, the best example is the word adelphos in Greek, which is brothers. It means brothers. But we can tell that when Paul was using this word, writing his letter to certain churches, that he wasn't just talking to the dudes. He was talking to everybody. And so the point of a translator would be, okay, so in modern English, we used to say words like, we talked about for all man, and man was a word that meant everybody, and that was pretty normal. Now that's less common, and we don't do that nearly as much. And so in gender inclusive translations, we'll translate adelphos as brothers and sisters, usually, as you said, with a footnote that says the literal translation of adelphos is brothers. But we're saying here brothers and sisters because we want it to be clear that the writer was talking to everybody, not just the men that were being written to. And I also point out in the book that the ESV, even though they have chosen not to do that, they have a similar footnote that says you could actually read this brothers and sisters. They're not disagreeing with the fact that Paul, in these circumstances, or other people, were writing to more than just men. They're just saying, we're going to render it, kind of to the point that Tim Nichols made a few minutes ago in the comments, we're going to render it literally and let the readers have to figure that out for themselves, understanding the context there. So I said in the book, I think it makes sense that I said this already here, that it makes sense that a functional equivalence, dynamic equivalence, thought-for-thought translation would lean that way. But I also understand why people would want a translation that doesn't do that. I think there's two sides to that coin that make sense.
So one of the ways that people have tried to parse this out is differentiate between gender inclusive and gender accurate, and that's what Nichols has been saying a little bit in the comments here. And he actually says here he sees the NRSV UE as gender inclusive, but he thinks the NIV and the NASB 2020 aren't. They're gender accurate. What do you think of that?
I've seen those comments kind of playing as we're talking, and I don't really understand what people mean by that, because I think that gender accurate and gender inclusive are used
Interchangeably,
interchangeably in the world from Bible translators, as I've seen it.
they
I
are.
think
Yeah.
I use the phrase gender inclusive, but I quote in the book, I quote something from the NASB translators when they went to the NASB 2020. They said we want to pursue gender accuracy in translation, and so, but their approach to that, to me, seems almost identical to the approach from the NRSV translators in those same passages.
Yeah, well, I would be interested to hear, Nichols, if you can give us any examples of where the NRSV, I'm sure you can come up with some, is maybe actually being more inclusive. I think there is a difference, though, because I've noticed certain translations do try to use that language, or translators will try to use that language. But I totally hear what you're saying, Wildsmith, because you're right. In the kind of the academic world, they'll use those terms a little more interchangeably. But I do think the difference is kind of what you said, that sometimes there could be this effort to change things out of some sort of political or philosophical concept. So I'll give you an example. In the NRSV preface, I'm talking about the original one, it actually talked about linguistic sexism, I believe was a term that they used. So that kind of gave you the sense that they were trying to be inclusive in order to not use sexism the way. And I don't think they were talking about the Bible. They were just talking about former English translations, that they had a problem with linguistic sexism. Whereas gender accurate is just what you're talking about,
Yeah,
which is we just want to make sure the reader understands what the original author meant. So I think the NRSVUE, to some people, has an agenda behind it. I think that's what Nichols
sure.
is bringing out there.
I see in the comments here people are talking about what I've described the use of adelphos to say brothers and sisters. They would describe that as gender accurate, whereas they're saying the phrase gender inclusive kind of implies more of an agenda on the. I'm using those phrases more interchangeably.
Yes,
But
that's
I see. Yeah, there are translations out there that um, unnecessarily remove gendered words from the translation because they want to be inclusive of people. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking
right.
about words like adelphos or things like that.
Yes, totally understand what you mean, and that's good for people to know when they read the book, that when you're saying that, you're not talking about an agenda, which you spell out. Actually, you're very clear about
Yeah,
why translators make those choices. And Nichols, I think he's conversing here in the comments, but he's talking about a documentary where the NSV committee is talking about getting rid of gender language as a whole. I actually have shown a clip of that on my channel before, and this, I think, this was done probably in the 90s. And yeah, they were even talking about, yeah, there's definitely, I don't know the whole makeup of their committee, but I know that there were some on there that you would just have to classify as theologically liberal.
yeah,
But what's interesting is, even with that said, like, even what they might have said, it's interesting that even the newest edition of the NRSV is not actually that different. Like, I mean, a lot of the language is still pretty similar, you
sure.
know?
The thing that makes me the maddest is that they changed in the beginning in Genesis chapter 1.
Oh, they did. I didn't even realize
There's
that.
some
Did they
things that
put
are,
when God began creating?
yeah, something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I hear what people are saying about the slight differences between those words. That makes sense to me for sure.
yeah.
And I think I'm one of those people who I try not to um, I try not to play into the liberal conservative thing,
Yes.
but at the same time, I'm not blind. I see things in as an evangelical, as somebody who's probably leans more conservative than not. I in a lot of ways, I see things about translations that are coming out of mainline churches and those sorts of folks where I go, my eyebrow raises at certain things, So I'm
Yeah.
not blind to those sorts of things. I try to be gracious as I approach them, and that's why in the book, I had to be careful what I said, because I'm trying to give my thoughts without giving too many opinions. Does that make
That's
sense?
right.
Like
Yes.
I don't want to. I wanted to present things as factually as possible and let people do a little bit more digging on their own.
That's good. I think the book, for those of you who are just curious about this, I encourage you to get it. It doesn't matter what background you're from, and you cover so many different things. Even you have a chapter on Catholic translations. Whatever your background is, there's going to be, I think, information presented in a way that's very, um, like you just said. You're not trying to delve into your opinions on everything. You're trying to be as factual as possible, as straightforward as possible. And I said in my review, you have a very irenic tone, a very peacemaking type of a tone to the book, even with the issue of gender language. I thought you did a really good job with that.
Thanks, man.
So
I really appreciate that.
I had to bring up that issue though, but
Yeah.
I can't help but I've been tempted this whole time to share something in regard to gender language. I was watching a speech of one of the, I won't say who it is, but it was just someone who's pretty well known
Mm-hmm.
and very, a scholarly person, and they're well known for being associated with a particular translation that tends to be more on the gender inclusive side.
Yeah.
And then they quoted Martin Luther. And when they quoted Martin Luther, they used masculine language in the quote.
Yeah.
And I thought, wait a second.
Yeah.
Why is it that you
Yeah.
think people can understand Luther, but you don't think they can understand so, but
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I feel like that's kind of a rough thing to throw in there.
I have a quote. One of my favorite quotes from a Civil War era minister named E.M. Bounds. Did a lot of great writing on prayer and many other things. And like, I have this quote that has just been in my life for the last 25 years. And it says, he says a lot, about we're at a strain to devise new methods and new organizations for the church. And he says, men are looking for better methods. God is looking for better men. And when I was a youth pastor, I had so many opportunities where I wanted to say that to students, and it was like, modern day teenagers think that we're just talking to the dudes right now. But I think that quote means, I think what he meant by that was, God is looking for better people. He wants people who really take this thing seriously. And I really struggled with that one, because I didn't want to tweak the quote, but I also wanted it to be inclusive of all of the girls in my youth group too,
Right.
And it's like, how do you do it? Like, they talked a different way back then than we do now.
That's true.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And but then I was thinking, as you were talking about that, about when Paul, if you take the literal phrase there, at one point he says, "Act like men."
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, well, how would you make that gender? Actually, the NKJV just says, "Be courageous." Isn't that interesting?
That's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you could translate that, "Act like people," but that just, kind
It doesn't have a ring to it, does
really,
it?
yeah, act like people.
That's right. That's right.
Uh,
Oh man.
All right. Well, I know I've covered all the topics that I wanted to. I guess, kind of closing question is just, what kind of led you to this place of writing this book, and what was your heart behind it when you got into it?
I started reviewing Bibles 4.5 years ago and joined this lovely community of YouTubers and people on Facebook, and kind of building this community. And the more Bibles I reviewed, the more questions and comments and emails I got from people. And I started to notice this thread where people say, okay, I watched all your reviews. I see a bunch of Bibles I like, but which translation is right for me? And I would do like, a very poor job of going, well, the ESV does this and the NIV does that, that sort of thing. And meanwhile, I'd be on Google looking for the book that kept coming up was How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth, which I read in seminary. It's a very, very common book, but like what they do on translations is very small, and it was outdated at the time. I couldn't find a book that gave everybody the information, that wasn't like this big, dense academic thing or had a bunch of other stuff. It was just Bible translations. It was just the basics. And so I started writing scripts for a video series on my channel, where I was going to do a video about the KJV and a video about the NKJV and just kind of go down the line. And about that time, my editor at Zondervan, a guy named Dale, reached out to me and said, hey, I've been watching your videos. I'm an editor. Do you have any writing ideas? Because I really think you're great, yada, yada, yada. And I said, man, I've got this idea for a video series about Bible translations, and I think it could be a good book if you know someone who wants to write it. And he said, well, why don't you write it? And I was like, okay. So I started, that was 2.5 years ago. So it's been a long journey for me, kind of doing my research, trying to get it simplified into a book that's really easy for everyday normal people to read. But also, so now when people ask me, what Bible translation should I read? I'm like, now I have like a simple, obviously it's my book, so I'm kind of being that guy, but I just wanted to have something where people go, hey, if your friend is looking for a good Bible and a good Bible translation, I'm going to give them this book because it's going to help them understand. And just like you said earlier, somebody who's been reading the Bible your whole life and knows a lot about this stuff, you still learned a few things. I learned a few things as I was researching the book. So I think that I hope that that's what it does. I hope that it stands the test of time and it becomes a book that people will turn to when they're trying to just figure out the differences and the similarities. And as I shared earlier, to help them develop a really good why for why they read the certain translation that they read.
That's awesome. And it's off to a really good start, isn't it?
It's doing really well. The folks at Zondervan have told me that the pre-orders were great, and it's only been out for a few days, but it's doing really well. So I don't think it's going to be a New York Times bestseller or anything like that, but I've already heard from a couple dozen people who said, I got it, I read the whole thing, and one person said, I listened to the audiobook and I read it, and I learned so much. And so that just, it means the world to you when you spend so much time and energy and effort working on something, and now people can actually hold it and read it, and it's blessing people. It's the greatest thing, man. I'm so thrilled.
And if people, I'm sure a lot of people know how to get it, but just in case someone is like, how do I get this book? How can
it is available everywhere books are sold. Amazon has a bunch of copies of it, so you can definitely go there. I'm sure Tim has an affiliate link down there. You can give him a little bit of love and click the affiliate link. It's got an ebook version. You can get a Kindle or an ebook. It's got, if you use a Nook, you can get it at Barnes & Noble. And there's an audiobook that's read by me. I read my own book. So if you'd like to hear my voice reading to you quietly and gingerly, you can listen to me read the book as well.
Ooh, that's awesome.
Yeah. Everything can be found at, I have a website, timwildsmith.com/Bible translations for everyone.
Great. And you're also doing some speaking engagements too, as well.
Yeah, I'm heading out tomorrow to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I'm going to be at Story Hill Church outside of Milwaukee this weekend. I'm going to do a little breakfast TED Talk on Bible translations, and I'm going to be preaching in their morning services. I'm doing that in Memphis, at a church in Memphis in January. I've got another gig planned for Nashville in March, but I'm definitely trying to. My goal would be to hit the road and go at least 1 weekend a month and talk about Bible translations and bless a church or bless a community or a college or something like that. So if people are interested, they can go to timwildsmith.com/speaking. There's a little form they can fill out to talk about inviting me to come to their church or their community.
It's awesome. The book, Bible Translations for Everyone, A Guide to Finding a Bible That's Right for You, ties in with your channel. Oh, by the way, as we're closing up here, I just got to read this quote. It's you're talking about, you've gone through all the translations. And I noticed you say something positive about every translation.
Trying to be positive in this world of negativity, Tim.
And here's what you said about the Christian Standard Bible, which I have often said is a really good translation. It offers the best of both worlds. If the tale of Goldilocks and the Three Bears included Bibles, in addition to bowls of porridge, chairs, and beds, I imagine the CSB would be the one deemed just right. So there you go.
I was really proud of that quote, Tim. Thanks for pointing that out, man.
An endorsement from Wildsmith of the CSB.
I hope the folks at Lifeway are watching and are very happy.
And on that note, we're going to say goodbye to our audience. And again, do thank the audience for your interaction throughout this time. We've enjoyed it. Thank you again to Tim Wildsmith, author of the book and friend of this channel, joining us again. And we hope to talk to you again, hopefully sometime, not in the not too distant future. But I want to say goodbye to everybody, and we'll see you next time.